Please mute yourself.
Yeah, if everybody could mute themselves,
Yeah.
and we'll get started.
Oh, I see you. I can see if you're not. I can see if you're not. Mhm. Took care of that. Okay. Kathy, you're going to let people in? Okay. I feel like it's been forever since we did this. Okay, and just a moment. I got way too many things open here. This is ridiculous. And
well, it's the end of the week. Now where you been? Well, now it's Feedback Friday, so come on in. Come sit down and stare at your screen. We got a presenter that you never seen. We're Feedback Friday, we're on the loose. We'll be the train, you be the caboose. It's Feedback Friday with Kathy and Amy. Mashed potatoes and the gravy. It's Feedback Friday all day long. Feedback, feedback, Feedback Friday.
Oh my goodness, there we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Feedback Friday. It is Friday, October 7th. Thank you, 7th, and this is episode 106. We're really happy that I can't believe I have to say 100 and something. 106. I'm Kathy Hattori, president of Botanical Colors, and joining me is Amy Dufault, communications director for Botanical Colors, and we are welcoming today Tenzin Tsomo, and I'll speak a little bit about her, but before I do that, I just want to say that Feedback Friday, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, is our show where we talk to artists, designers, activists, historians, scholars. Oh boy, anybody who's interested in natural color, natural dyes, like we are, and we love to talk about color and textiles. So let's see, what else am I going to be telling you? Oh yeah, let's see. Next week, we're not going to have a Feedback Friday, but I am for the first time going to the New York Sheep and Wool Festival at Rhinebeck. And Amy's also going to be there with her Fiber Shed group. And so if you see a very short lady with short gray hair bobbing around, that is me. Come say hi.
There's probably not going to be anybody who looks like that.
No.
No.
Anyway, come say hi. I'd love to talk to you and see what you're up to. I see that there's a lot of natural dyers that are going to be in the vendor area. Since I've never been here, I'm not even quite sure, but I understand it's pretty big. So I'll probably be looking at what's going on there. I think that'll be super interesting. So yeah, and you can email Amy, Amy at botanicalcolors.com if you actually want to have a real conversation and we'll make some time for you and love to meet with you and talk with you. I also have a workshop at the Bainbridge Artist Resource Network locally here called Barn. It's we're going to be making a table runner and napkins from vintage and naturally dyed fabrics. We'll be doing some fabric, we'll be doing some stitching, we'll be doing some natural dyeing, so it'll be really fun. And that is November 5th and 6th coming up. If you're interested, please join us. We've had a beautiful, beautiful autumn here in Seattle, and so hopefully the weather will be super great. And Barn is an incredible resource. If you are a textile person and you live in the Puget Sound area and you are able to get to Bainbridge and have a look at their facility, it's a very, very nice textile lab and studio. We also put our 16-ounce liquid dyes on sale. So if you are a fan, and I did a presentation about liquid dyes a few weeks back, if you've been interested in trying them, we have pretty much value priced these guys, the 16-ouncer. So take a look at those and see if that's interesting. And we also are really excited that we're able to have a couple of offerings from indigenous artists and scholars. One is, of course, the classic Braiding Sweetgrass book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you have not read or heard this book, I highly recommend it. It just kind of moves you from a stage of environmental despair to a place where you can talk about hope and think about things that you can do and the world around you that still has so much beauty, and the gifts that we get. And it's just amazing. She's a botanist and a First Nations member. And then the other thing that we have is some not textile paints, watercolor paints from Beam Paints. And she's from Manitoulin Island in Canada and has an amazing color sense and eye. Third generation paint maker. We have a few of her travel cards and a few palettes and things like that. And they're just amazing. So have a look at those. And now I'm going to talk about our speaker, Tenzin Tsomo. So we're welcoming Tenzin Tsomo, who actually lives here in Seattle, Washington. So I can't wait to actually meet in real life. And so her presentation will look at key moments in the history of Tibetan weaving in Nepal, where it's moved from a coveted skill kept within families in Tibet to the dissemination of that indigenous craft knowledge to Tibetan refugees, as well as local Nepali artisans of recent. And so while the weaving itself has transformed the lives and economy of many communities, the technique itself has been diluted down in the last couple of decades to cater to the ruthless demands of capitalism. I'm really interested to hear what Tenzin has to say. For a little bit of housekeeping, Amy is moderating this call and the chat, so she'll be admitting people as well as the chat is off for now, but we'll have it open once Tenzin is completed with her presentation. And Amy will be feeding the questions to Tenzin. So Tenzin, you don't have to read the chat and try to respond to that. And so let's just go with this presentation. Tenzin, thank you so much and welcome to Feedback Friday.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Amy, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for creating this wonderful space here, right? It's very rare that you get to be in a room full of like your fellow textilians and get all nerdy about textiles. So I'm really excited to be here and super honored that Botanical Colors called me to be part of Feedback Friday, because I've been following your work since I was a student at California College of the Arts with Sasha, and it's just such a honor, and I'm really, really thrilled to be here. So before I get started, let me just share my PowerPoint. And I'm loud enough, right? You can hear me? Okay, great. Let's do the slideshow. All right. So let me just put this here. All right, okay. So the topic for my presentation today is the evolution of contemporary Tibetan rug weaving in exile. So I was really thinking about my presentation, and I didn't like the word. I was like, maybe I should change the word history a little bit. And I really like this word evolution in the context of my conversation today, because one of the definitions of the word that I got was a pattern formed by or as if by a series of movement. And I love that, right? Because it suggests a kind of continuity and it makes it feel more positive and expansive, this craft tradition that I'm going to talk about. And especially for because it's a craft tradition in our exile community, I just feel like every knowledge that we have is so precious. So I have now a one-year-old toddler, and I really think a lot about this concept of legacy, right? And what am I going to leave for not just him, but also the next generation. So that being said, again, like I said, the topic of my presentation is going to be looking at the Tibetan rug weaving in exile and how it's been evolving in the last 5 or 6 decades. So before I start, my name is Tenzin Tsomo, and I am a textile artist and weaver based here in the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish tribe in present-day Seattle. I am a weaver and also a daughter and granddaughter of Tibetan refugees who were carders, spinners, dyers, and weavers, and eventually became exporters of Tibetan rugs. This is a book called Of Wool and Loom, and this is the only, for people who want to read more about Tibetan rugs, this is the only book written by two Tibetans on the topic of Tibetan rugs. So I thought I would share that. So this, on the right-hand side, is an image from the same book, and it shows a small, it's not a weaving workshop, it's two weavers who are actually going to weave in the house of whoever is commissioning this carpet. So carpet weaving was a very ancient heritage craft, and most Tibetan refugees were pastoral nomads, right? So they never kept carpets in their own houses. In Tibet, carpets were commissioned and afforded only by the elite class and high government officials and monasteries. Only a few family weavers in select provinces, they wove. So the tradition was very secretive. It was passed down from one generation to another and really tightly guarded within weavers' families. However, unlike the contemporary Tibetan carpets woven today, these carpets at least reflected the aesthetic tastes, the lifestyles, and the religious beliefs of the Tibetan society of the time. After the Chinese invasion of Tibet in 1959, thousands of Tibetans fled their country to Nepal and India. So the exile government was really keen to find ways to train the newly arrived Tibetans with handicraft skills. At this time, there were only a few master weavers in the community. On the left-hand side is late Gain Siring Tokela. His name is Siring Tokela. Gain is a respectable way of saying teacher. And he passed away, and it was such a huge loss, right, for our Tibetan community in exile. But he was also the one that taught me how to weave rugs, and it really shared a lot of information about what rug weaving was like back in Tibet. So as you can see on the right-hand side, this is the Jollikil Refugee Handicraft Center, one of the first centers that were opened in Nepal to teach Tibetans how to weave. Now, some things that I want you to take notice in the photo is, initially when they first arrived, they had no access to paper and no access to graphs. And even Nepal was not a very developed country, right? So for graph making, you would need like really, really big papers, and they didn't have access to that. So Gain Siring Tokela would teach the indigenous method of reweaving a rug, which was, you would look at the back of the rug, as you can see the women here. Let me go ahead and use the presenter. Give me 1 second. There's a pointer. Okay, this makes it a lot easier. Okay, so they were referring to the back of rugs to weave their rugs. But before they even did that, they didn't even have enough rugs. So if he was teaching weavers how to weave, what he would do is, in the whole workshop, he would be weaving the rug that he was referencing, and he would like literally have to like really scream out the instructions to the whole workshop saying, okay, 2 blue knots, 3 red knots, or what have you, give the colors and the knotting, and also talk about like the variety of knots to weave it, and then they would weave it alongside him, so you can just imagine that, right? And so what happened was the Swiss, give me 1 second. So the Swiss Red Cross and the Swiss Agency for Technical Assistance, what happened later on is they introduced graphs, paper graphs, and the artists in the community they also got to participate, where they would paint their designs, and they would create new designs, and Tibetan refugees could actually now reference a graph, which made it a lot easier to weave the rugs. So this image here, I really like this image here because it reminds me of what my mom used to tell me. My mom started weaving when she was in high school, right? And she would go to school, come back from school, and weave alongside her friend. And first they would weave her rug. As soon as they were finished, then they would weave a rug at her friend's place and finish the 3x6. They were usually about 3 foot by 6 foot, and then sell it to store owners, Tibetan store owners, who would sell the rugs to tourists that visited the country. Okay, so within a decade or two, more enterprising Tibetan families, they left the Jollikil Handicraft Center, they left the cooperative, and they started their own workshops. They were training other weavers in Nepal to weave, and they started their own stores and selling the rugs that they were producing in their own workshop. So this, for instance, is my mom on the left-hand side. You can see this is outside her store, and she's also with a couple of her friends who also own stores close by. By the time I was born, my mom had her own workshop and this store, but as they kept getting more successful, my dad, she stopped the store, and my dad joined his family's business, and they started exporting rugs to Europe and the US. So having no practical knowledge of Tibetan crafts, I realized that I was being fed what Tibetan crafts and objects were through a lot of museum displays. Just to give you a little bit more context, there isn't a lot of museums in Nepal and India, right, to visit. It's not as common as here in the US. So when I was here in the US, I was going to a lot of like Asian art museums that showed Tibetan artworks. And, it was all framed through a very Western ethnographic gaze. And some of it makes you really uncomfortable, right? That way of learning about my culture and accessing our history, it felt really inadequate and very limited to me. And I really wanted to learn something that was more hands-on, which I felt would be a more intimate way of connecting with my heritage. So in 2012, I went back to Nepal, and for the first time, I learned how to weave a rug and use a floor loom just to weave a fabric. And there was something about it that just felt really familiar, even though I had never really woven, but it just kind of like, it made sense to my hands and just my sensibility. And it really got me excited about something for the first time. Weaving and dyeing, but most importantly, it sort of gave me like this permission and a sort of confidence to start imagining what it would look like to reclaim agency on defining our own aesthetics that is shaped by our stories and our experiences, and is very much alive and breathing in this moment. Something that I keep circling back to is my work with photographs of my family that I find in books or in online archives. This is a book by a Chinese photographer called Man Li-Chin, and it's a collection of his photography of China. But in it, I also found a photo of my grandmom on the right, carding wool at the Refugee Handicraft Center in Nepal. So for me, like placing her photograph in the book was obviously a deliberate attempt at erasing the experience of Tibetan refugees and their displacement. So I really wanted to explore how textiles, which is usually associated with women's work and perceived as unthreatening and dismissive, could actually be a medium that is confrontational, and it really probes the unreliability of these archives. I joined the California College of Arts in 2014, and for the 2.5 years that I was there, I was able to subconsciously build a body of work that would eventually be my senior show called Displaced Archives, a reverberation of Exile. And these are some of my photos of the exhibition. On the left-hand side is a jacquard weaving of my grandmom of the photo that I just showed you. And on the right-hand side is a photo I found on the public archive of her sister. So my grandmom, her sister, they left Tibet, or they escaped Tibet to come to Nepal together. And my mom was born in Nepal, in the border of Nepal and Tibet. So I had a really difficult time explaining why I wanted to study textiles and why I wanted to learn weaving to my mom and my grandmom especially, because it was a time in their life and it was very, very hard. They were doing this for their livelihood, and they just couldn't wrap their head as to why I wanted to do it again and go backwards. For them, that was it. That was how they understood it. And for me to be able to do this for them and invite them for the senior show was really, it meant a lot to me, because I think they finally understood what I was going with it. And, you know, it's like more honoring them and their labor and the livelihood and the hard work that they, you know, honoring their past, right? And they needed to see that also to be able to move forward and to really appreciate what I wanted to do with the craft. So these are more images of the senior show. At the back is my sort of rendition of a Tibetan pangden. And what a Tibetan pangden is, it's a long strip weaving that you weave in one, that you just weave once, and then you actually compositionally, after you weave it, you kind of like stitch it up together, and it just creates this really beautiful pattern. Like it can be like very varied, but this is just like my version of it. Usually Tibetan pangdens are very colorful, and I'll share more of it in the slides, upcoming slides. And so the 4 panels, the black panels on the sides, they're supposed to be like bodies. And then the braids that are coming out of the Tibetan braids that especially performers now or older Tibetans love to wear colorful braids. And so this is my grandmom, my late grandmom. She passed away in 2017, but I was just really, really happy that she got to see the show. And this is her standing with a bouquet of flowers that someone got me. And, you know, she's standing next to the weaving. Okay, so after my studies at California College of the Arts, I traveled back to Nepal several times, and I realized that most of the rugs were being fabricated for artisan designers in Europe or the US, and that we as Tibetans, even though the craft came from us, we weren't designing the rugs anymore, right? So we were overseeing rug production and fabricating them, which is no easy task. Like nowadays, rugs, contemporary rugs have like 40 to 50 colors, and you really have to have a very trained eye to kind of see subtle changes in colors to create like these incredible rugs, right? But that is a topic for another conversation. But what I meant is, like Tibetan rugs that were being woven in Tibet or in the early years of Tibetans in exile, now the rugs weren't being designed by us. And so we were losing that kind of this creative ability to design rugs. We weren't doing it anymore. And so I started this business called Studio Tenzin. Tenzin is a Tibetan word for interdependence, and that is our business philosophy. It really guides our commitment to our craft, our research, and the artisans and our sustainable practices. We are based here in Seattle, and you know, I put the website information there if you would like to find more information about that. So this is the Nesor family that we work with, incredible family. So I think for me, it was really, really important to be able to work with a workshop that is actually owned by the weavers. And also inspire them, talk to them, and potentially collaborate with them on designs moving forward. I started the business in 2019, so it's very new, and you know, COVID hit right after. So technically, it just feels like I'm just like getting started with the business right now. So there's a lot of potential for, you know, amazing things to happen together when the weavers are really invested in their craft, and it's also something that they do for their livelihood. We did a really fun photo shoot with the weavers, you know, and we asked them to bring their favorite, you know, tools that they weave rugs with. And Regina on the right, she bought her iPhone, and I was just thinking, yes, like you can't be in the studio or you can't be weaving without like your favorite music. So I just thought that was really funny. On the left is our master weaver of the workshop. He's holding a tiger rug, and on the right hand side, he's just wanting to be funny, and he's just doing like a Bollywood pose, which I thought was hilarious. Okay, so since we have a lot of people who are in textiles and a lot of weavers themselves, I kind of wanted to take some time to explain why the Tibetan rug weaving is so unique from the more popular Persian and Turkish knots. So our Tibetan knotting is called loop and cut because it's basically taking a loop around the rod, and after you're done with the whole line of weaving, weaving, you just basically cut it. So it's called loop and cut. It's very similar to how velvet is woven. Versus the Persian and Turkish knots, like you can just see how different they are from each other, right? So the Persian is a more asymmetric, Turkish is the symmetric, but the technique is very different from the Tibetan rug weaving. Okay, and then here you actually see the rod and see the loop going around it. And as soon as she's done with this whole line, she's going to use it's almost like a blade, and then she'll cut it. Okay, and this is, so now the potential, I think this technique is so ingenious, because if you think about it, look at all these rods, right? These are rods of varying thicknesses. So say, for example, if you want to weave, this is not a really good example of a high and low pile, because the one on the background is just a sumac weave, which is not knotted with a loop, right? But if you want to create sort of like textures, you can loop with different sizes of the rod and actually create really, really beautiful textures. And that technique, or that texture of rugs, is called Burma, B-O-O-R-M-A, Burma. And it's very rare to find Burma rugs here in anywhere outside of Tibet. Okay, this is an example of the Burma technique on the right-hand side. I'll show it to you in more detail. So the borders use a thicker rod, and then the background here, the checkerboard background, uses a smaller rod, and so it creates this really nice effect. Here's a more close-up of it. So as a designer, one thing that I look at a lot and reference is the anatomy of older Tibetan rugs, especially the saddle rugs. They're like one of my favorites. They were woven in two separate parts because obviously the houses back in Tibet were much smaller, right? So, and also the looms become smaller, so they're limited to just the size of the rug. But I love the idea of actually like stitching it up together after it's done to create like a bigger size. And so the saddle rugs do that, right? And they're also like very different shapes, and it's just not a typical square or a rectangle. They have like different shapes. Like this one has a little slight curve, some kind of look like a butterfly. They're like amazing examples online if you check, if you look for it. And so this rug, it references not just the saddle rug, but also the color of a Tibetan high pile rug called surug that Tibetan nomads used to weave. Now, like I mentioned before earlier in the presentation, the rugs that are woven currently, the pile rugs woven in Nepal right now, this was a technique that only few families in Tibetans, they wove, right? So for my family, my grandmom was a pastoral nomad. She never had rugs like this in her own house. So the kind of rugs that they would weave, it's very high up in the plateau, very, very cool. They would weave these loosely like high pile. It's almost like Berber rugs, like very high pile, and that would keep them warm, right? Because they had a lot of sheep. So they had enough yarn to make very warm blankets or rugs. So they would weave this rug, and it was very ubiquitous because I have an older relative here in Seattle, and he remembered this. You know, I asked a lot of them about Tibetan rugs, and he remembered when he was in India, this was when they had first arrived to India, he lost his rug, and I was asking him to describe his rug, and he said, oh, it's a black rug with a red border, and this is the kind of rugs that I saw a lot growing up in a lot of Tibetan homes, because they were still being woven in the house, right? And so I was really inspired by that, and so using natural dyes, I created this first version of my rug that I designed, that's a nod to saddle rugs, but also a nod to the old surugs, and also wanted to kind of tell my cousin, okay, this, you know, this is the kind of rug that, you know, your story inspired me to make a design, which which is really important for me. Another abstract rug that I designed making, again, reference to a saddle rug, as you can see the holes. But this pair of rug is a mirror image of each other, and it's not really joined. You can either use it separately, because it's a 3x6 rug, but it is a mirror image of each other, and it does reference a saddle rug, the form of it. This is another example of two rugs woven separately, but having the option to either sew or use them separately. The word for stripes in Tibetan is ja, which means rainbow. And the textile that I have on the left-hand side over my traditional dress, it's called a pangden. And you can see, compared to the pangden that I made for my senior show, this is very colorful. These are textiles that are designed, they're woven, and they're worn by Tibetan women. So pangdens are stripes of coordinated bands of varying thicknesses. They are woven in a single panel, but when finished, they are, the three separate panels are sewn together. And so the rug on the right-hand side, it makes reference to the literal word, right, ja, the rainbow. And because the whole idea is, I really want to understand and learn more about pangden, because there's very little literature about pangdens. And so there is a pangden, there is a composition, there are many various words for pangden compositions, and one is called jalok. Jalok literally means you weave many stripes of different colors, and then you repeat that rainbow. And so this is literally taking that idea of like taking the colors of the rainbow and repeating itself. So jalok, the rainbow repeats itself. And so here seen together. And so like this way of working with textiles and rug design, I think it's like really generative and really expansive, right? Because you're able to do so many things. And it's also, in some ways, it's also tracing exactly the way that Tibetan weavers were working in Tibet. So you kind of get a sensibility of the design choices that they were also making along the way. And I just felt like this was really, what do you call it? A really hands-on, like, you know, way of working with that. Another set of style of rugs that really inspired me were rugs that don't take the shape of the loom, like I mentioned in the previous slide. So because I make a lot of smaller accent rugs like these, I need a backdrop, it's kind of like a landscape to hold them. And so these are like puddles of lakes, or in this case of natural dyes, that kind of look like they're almost poured over. And the way it's created is it's actually woven on a rectangular loom, but it's a cutout, and then at the end the cutout is actually stitched together to create like this kind of effect. This is from the same collection. You know, something I think about a lot is authenticity, right? Those of us in exile, we always like casually told that what we're making is not authentic. And, you know, that's something that I think about a lot. What does authentic even mean, right? If you are being your authentic self and creating designs based on your authenticity, and your culture is also dynamic and it's changing and shifting, but what an amazing way to actually create that kind of authenticity, talking to your elders, talking to people in your community, and actually translating your textile sensibilities into designs, right? That counts as authentic. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't mean that you have to create like the same rugs that were being produced in Tibet to call it an authentic rug. So this one, that being said, this is my cushion collection, and it's called Töba momos. Tö is the side, is the part of Tibet that I'm from. Pa means of, belonging to Tö. So Töba momos are momos means grandmom, momos of my community. And so this momo collection is totally inspired by Töba momos. And, you know, grandmoms from my village, they come in the whole spectrum of personalities. So the first one, this is my momo dichin. My grandmom, whose picture you've already seen in the previous slides, she was fearless and strong-willed. She loved horses. She could even tame the wild ones. So I gave her fierce hair, like the stripes from my favorite tiger rugs, and a round, hairy mole that she almost tore off on several occasions. She likes her braids in red and black. Her younger sister, with whom she left her home in Tibet, is Momo Ugen. We lost her when I was away in school. She would bring us cakes and fresh cheese from bakeries where only foreign tourists ate. She had a visibly high bridged nose and spacious nostrils, and locals in Nepal would often tease her and tell her that she didn't look Tibetan. I decorated her hair with a Pangden composition of skinny bands of dull reds and blues called chuang because she never liked bright colors. My paternal great aunt, Momo Yula, is one of the only Tibetan elders I know that at her age she passed the US citizenship test, which was conducted in English, with flying colors, like she did even better than all of us. She's in the late 70s, but is probably more experienced when it comes to using her smartphone than any of us. At family weddings, she leads us all in songs, and she brews the best Tibetan rice wine. So for her, I made a decorative adornment of border motifs with matching stripes. My Momo Yangje is the one who taught me the names of all the Pangden compositions in my vocabulary. I call her a natural artist. She has all the fantastic tales and she doesn't even know it. Her family back in Tibet were all weavers, not rug weavers, like just they would weave fabrics and Pangdens. They fled Tibet as soon as they got their first chance and ended up leaving all the Pangdens that she wove back in Tibet. But here's the fascinating story. So in the 1990s, when the second wave of Tibetan migrants were entering Nepal from Tibet, she saw Tibetan women, a newly arrived Tibetan refugee women, wearing one of her Pangdens that she had woven back in Tibet. And she showed it to me, and it had like bands of yellows and oranges. So, you know, and she's like a really artistic grandmom too, and she's always participating in all our cultural events and dances and stuff like that. So I gave her turquoise and corals alongside her Pangden that I was imagining in my head, the ones that she showed me. So I kind of recreated the Pangden for her, and this is Momo Yangche Kushin. So Momo Bengo, I don't know her in person. When I used to go for rounds around the stupa in Nepal, in Bauda, I remember seeing this grandmom, and she was the only Tibetan grandmom that actually had bangs. And her name was Momo Bengo because she was the grandmom with bangs. So when I was in Nepal, I actually looked out for her and also heard that she had passed away already. Otherwise, it would have been really joy to be able to show her and tell her that, you know, I have a design inspired by her. This slide shows Rinchen Dolma on the left and on the right, Tenzin Tsomo. They have an organization called, a nonprofit organization called Made in Exile. And one of the residencies that they did was a rug weaving residency in, I think, in 2018 or 2019. And it was a really incredible rug weaving program that brought elders in the community in Toronto to teach the young weavers to weave rugs, and they are really inspiring group, inspiring duo of artists. So I'll really check their work if you want to learn more about their program. They're called Made in Exile, and we collaborated with a young photographer in Toronto called Ngawang Dato, and to take a series of photographs with them. If you're interested in reading more about their work, I also have a blog post on my website. So with the popularity and marketability of Tibetan hand-knotted rugs in the high-end design market, the industry was always susceptible to being shaped by the trends of the design world. Despite, or more likely because of its popularity, aspects of Tibetan traditional knowledge have been diluted down over time for both efficiency and to meet the standards of the market. With so many structural changes made to the unique process of Tibetan knotting, how are each of us in the supply chain complicit in harming and endangering the tradition of the craft? Whose voices are shaping the future of contemporary rug making, Tibetan rug making, excuse me? And how is incorporating industrialized standard into this craft industry resulted in further alienating even the artisans from their work. I consider weaving as akin to a native language. It is one of the few traditions that we've inherited in exile. It is a language of survival, a language that is woven with our stories and histories we've lived through. The first generation of Tibetan weavers and entrepreneurs in exile embraced innovations and changes because their livelihood depended on it. They worked within the framework of a manufacturer and catered to the rapidly changing markets they served. It is the task of the next generation of artists, creatives, and entrepreneurs to claim ownership of our craft, revive lost skills, and invest in building more decentralized business practices that also prioritize creative collaboration within our own communities. We need to reclaim carpet weaving as a culture and acknowledge the richness of this artistic lineage. It is critical that we challenge the values of both the past and the present repeatedly, so our creativity for rug weaving can emerge back from the shadows and evolve on its own path. Thank you so much. Let me stop share.
Tenzin, that was such a lovely and thoughtful discussion of the history of the craft and the way that you're moving in a direction to bring it forward, and not, I don't even want to say forward, you're just trying to re-imbue it with your own sensibility and design. And the stories about the momos and all their distinctive personalities was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just really incredible. Are there other carpet designers, textile designers who are among your cohort who are from Tibetan?
Not that I know of. And even if people have been doing design, like, you know, I have a lot of relatives, my dad himself, who will just casually make designs, but it's more like, oh, what's selling, what's not selling. Like, you know, it's a very, I don't want to say superficial, but it's very it's like more like business decisions, right? They're not like really designing rugs with intention of like, you know, telling our own stories and incorporating certain kind of like you said, our textile sensibilities in it. It is difficult to have a business working from this angle because, you know, maybe it'll sell, maybe it'll not. It's a very personal thing, right? But I just feel like it's a more impactful way to, if I'm not doing that, then I don't want to do what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then the very angular saddlebags and the floor rugs that were not square. I mean, they were rectangular, but they weren't completely rectangular. I thought that was super fascinating. Is that actually is that your interpretation of a design tradition?
Yeah. So rather than my interpretation, I think like anything that I make new of, firstly, because rugs are so expensive to produce, I think so much about each and every design that I'm going to recreate. And so it's more like, if I'm making a rug, I want to reference something from the past or reference something that came out from a tradition. So like I said, you can see the evolution, right? You can see the movement that happened. So for someone to say, my way of making Tibetan rugs is inauthentic, what do you mean by that, right? It's coming from my authentic self. And this is something that Tibetans and exiles are often told, like, oh, rugs from Tibet had such enigma. And that's one reason why I've kind of stopped reading books about Tibetan rugs written by non-Tibetans. It kind of, there's that suggestion that's made, you know, like, oh, the creativity that was there in Tibet, the collection is so amazing. There are only a few, but now they're all dead. Like as of creative, and we are not creating anymore. But we are very much alive and contemporary. But the times that we are living in is very different, right? So even our rugs will look different. But it's kind of nice to just be able to trace.
Yeah,
have a
there's
trace.
definitely a romanticization of the exotic that happens quite a bit when people are doing this cultural interpretation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Exactly.
mhm. All right. So, Amy, I'm sure you
Yeah.
have some questions.
There's a couple questions for sure. Okay.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Tenzin. I'm just going to start with the first question. So kind of they come out from different places. So no real flow. Somebody's asking, can you explain some of the tools shown at the end of your presentation?
Yeah, for sure. I will have to share the screen again.
Sure.
Where were the tools? Where were the tools? You know, and like the amazing thing about the tools, is it okay if I just keep it at the screen? Is it?
Sure. Yep. Yep. Fine.
So I think it's like I've forgotten PowerPoint.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get rid of the notes, but I think it was somewhere here. Okay, this is a little better. Yeah, so the amazing thing about tools is, you know, it's because people have been using it for so long, and like I won't even be surprised if some of the tools were made back in like the 1960s or 70s. That's how long they last, right? And they have like the patina of like having been woven for so long. And I just think like the tools in itself are so poetic. Like I want to just like not even make rugs and just make a series of like work just based on like, you know, the tools and the materials, and like some of the images are just something that I shared just being in there, being in the space. They're not, give me a second. Yeah, like this, say for example, like the one on the left hand side, you know, when the weavers are weaving their rug together, they use these like kind of like ladders on the two sides, and as they have to keep going higher and higher, they kind of take the plank and move it higher and higher, you know. So I mean, it's just like such an ingenious way of being able to weave higher without actually having to go up and roll it out. They'll just keep going higher, and after a certain point, then obviously they will have to roll the rug down, right? And on the right hand side, it's just a bale of yarn that just arrived, and I just thought it was so stunning and beautiful.
Mm. All right. Were there any other tools that were there, or I know
Yeah,
when we talked on Tuesday, you were talking about how it just inspired you or just by the studio itself, and
yeah.
you talked about that bale. It's all of a sudden you see it, you're like, I think I'm gonna wrap this around it, or
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, like even this one, right? Like it's just the weighing scales, like we still have an option of course now to be able to weigh the yarn using electric or, you know, battery operated scales. But, you know, we still use these old school style weighted iron, you know, to weigh the bales. Yeah, and this is kind of like a tool to wash the rug at the end, and this really helps soften the rug a lot. There you go.
I don't think I realized that was a rug before when that slide was up. I just saw the fringe. I just saw the water, but got it.
Yep.
And that's how they make it softer, right?
Yeah. So softer, but also like you wanna wash the rug really, really well, get all the soap out, you know, and they also like the rug tends to get a little felted. Like wool, if you've washed wool, you'll see like just a little bit of washing it will kind of felt it a little bit. So this one will actually help comb the pile, so it's like soft and nice, and it prevents it from getting too felted after the washing process.
Okay. All right. I don't know if you have more tools. We definitely have more questions.
Yeah, we can go.
I don't know if you wanted to stop the share so I could see you.
Sorry.
That's all right.
There you go.
Somebody's asking about the woven braid extensions, and you could talk more about them, that she's seen them in books. So I know from what your presentation, you were talking about the braids and the different women who have had impacts on you in your life and influence, but is there some other thing you can talk about, some other angle about the braids?
It's just like some, growing up, you see all these Tibetan elder women wearing their colorful braids. It's something that we don't do anymore, or we don't like, we'll do it on occasions, especially, but it's also still not very common. But, like not having that kind of visual, what do you say? Not seeing it visually, the elders, like even my grandmom, she would wear her colorful braids back in Nepal, but like here, she wouldn't. Like, it's just something that's forgotten, right? And then just kind of like missing or remembering it, or yeah, that was just like my way of, and it's just so, whenever I think of Tibetan elders, I think of their colorful braids. Let's just put it that way. And it just felt incomplete if I don't give them the braids, right? Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, well, this is a nice segue into something you haven't talked about yet. Kay saying, I love your work and presentation. How are you marketing your rugs and works? And I think that there's a launch tomorrow you might want to talk about.
Oh, yeah. So I have my website where you can buy from directly if you're not here in Seattle. B, there is a really, really amazing program called Seattle Restored that the city of Seattle is doing with a few local art nonprofits, and what they're trying to do is revive empty storefronts and empty stores in the downtown Seattle area. And so the collective marketplace that I'm participating for is tomorrow. The address is 1505 Fifth Avenue. It's very close to downtown. It's the space where Madewell used to be. And so alongside 6 other small businesses, we are open from Thursdays to Sundays from 12 to 5. So if you're in the Seattle area, please come visit. I'm going to have my rugs there, and it's just going to be a really lovely time. The market runs all the way through December 23rd.
That's great. Perfect for the holidays. And I just put the link in chat for that. So
thank you.
All the information's there.
Thank you.
Okay. I wish I could go. Where do you obtain your wool, and what natural dyes are you using?
Yeah, so the wool is, I love the wool that we're using. It's Tibetan Highland wool, and it comes from Tibet. It's a very greasy wool. It's all the process work happens in Nepal, right? The other kind of wool that comes in Nepal and India, and I think a lot of places in general, is the New Zealand wool. And though New Zealand wool is really, really good, most of the process of washing and everything happens, I think like it's through machines, and the chemicals used to wash the yarn are very strong. And what happens is it kind of removes all the lanolin from the rug, from the wool. Tibetan wool, on the other hand, it's all washed by hand, right? So it keeps the lanolin in the yarn itself. And what happens down the line is, as the rug starts aging, it just develops a really beautiful sheen. I'm not even kidding. And if you really want to see it, come visit me at Seattle's Restored.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go. Now you're stepping it up. I'll see you tomorrow.
But yeah, no, in all honesty, the wool that we use is something that I take a lot of pride in, and it's something that I want to continue using. The other thing is also, I thought like if the wool has really high lanolin, it won't dye well, but it takes and dye beautifully. Natural dyes, we use indigo, we use madder that we get from Nepal in itself, walnuts, indigo, padam gel, you name it, like we're using all the dyes. The only thing that we're not using is marigolds or floral, natural dyes, because the floral ones are not really fast. And for something like a rug that you want to last, hopefully for generations and generations, it's better to use more like protein dyes or like root dyes, right? Yeah.
Hey, let's see. Can you talk about some of the patterns and somebody's asking, are the patterns symbolic of your heritage? They are beautiful. So I know, like the tiger,
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
About those
So
patterns.
everything is symbolic of something. Like every design that I make is in reference to. See, here's the thing, right? When you are in the exile community, out of the place where you're actually supposed to be, right? We don't have a country of our own, so there are traditions that can be lost within a generation in itself. And so, like for me, when I'm designing a rug, I want to reference something from the past. So the conversation of that continues on, right? And so everything that I'm referencing is part of my heritage. Like say, for example, the pangden, all of us are wearing pangdens. We don't even know who's making our pangdens. Some of them are handmade. We're just making handmade pangdens, but we don't know the maker of our pangdens. And we also, we can't like afford to have everything handmade. So we're buying these machine-made pangdens too. Everyone is wearing it, but we have no control over the designing of our pangdens, and we don't even understand the compositions of our pangden. So for me to reference the pangden on the cushions is a way of, again, saying, hey, this is not just the pangden, there are variations of pangden, right? Like I said in the rug, the rainbow repeats itself. Like no one knows that there is a word called jalok for that kind of pangden. So we can start looking at the pangdens and actually like say, okay, I want a pangden that is in this composition, you know, so we can engage with the design process, but also understand it beyond just being a textile that's woven by women in our community.
Yeah. You had some really beautiful things to say about that too on Tuesday, and Kathy was mentioning some things about that too, just, you know, coming across, Kathy, you were talking about coming across some piece of something that you were like in a
I found a
consignment.
pangden in
You found a
in an antique store, and it was so
Yeah.
beautiful. But then I also didn't know its story or its
Yeah.
significance, and I was afraid that, yeah, I had to
Where
not.
did it come from?
It
Yeah.
was not an acquisition I was going to make at that
Yeah.
time, but it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Tenzin, you had some feedback for Kathy on that. That was kind of, it was very interesting to me. It's something I'd never thought about, like where all these clothing, where everything is coming from. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
I'm sorry, which
Well, you were talking about just some of these, where the clothes were coming from, that were from people who were no longer living, and it was just lots of clothes taken from them. Maybe people
Oh,
who,
that was Kathy.
or the Kathy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it was about seeing. I was in a conflict area, or it had been a conflict area,
Right.
and then there was a tourist shop that had lots of traditional textiles, and the man was really kind of abrupt with me because I was asking a lot of questions about like, why were all of these different, you know, villages being represented? And then it hit me that of course that it had been a war, and probably these people had either had to sell their clothing or
Mhm.
they were no longer alive, and this was
Mhm.
their clothing.
Mhm.
It was pretty sobering to think about it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let us not like bump ourselves
I
out
don't.
here.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, let's come back. But
Yeah.
I've got one. I mean, we're at time, but I'm just going to ask one question really quick because Kay's asking, how large is the Tibetan in exile community in Seattle, approximately, and in the U.S.?
Oh, that's a really good question. In the US would be hard to answer, but I can tell you it's a growing community, especially in places like California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and New York. There's a huge Tibetan community, and in Canada, Toronto, huge Tibetan community. We are like spread out everywhere around Canada and the United States. In Seattle, there's about maybe I would say 250 to 300 of us. Yeah, and actually in every August, if you're interested, we're in partnership with Seattle Center. We have a Tibet Fest every August, last weekend of every August. So if you're interested, definitely you should stop by.
All right. Well, if you have a link for that, I can grab it for you later and I'll put it in the video post. But
Oh, sure.
yeah, Well, thank you so much for
Yeah,
the
Tenzin,
invitation
thank
today.
you.
I'm really
Thank you for
appreciate-
having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're
Thanks
going to go
once
ahead
again
and
to Sasha
unmute
Dor for
everybody.
introducing
Yeah,
us.
thank you, Sasha, for the
Yeah,
introduction.
yeah.
You can unmute and say hello.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Thank you very
Hi.
much.
Tenzin.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you for your presentation. You did awesome.
Yes,
Awesome.
very awesome. I love the way
Oh.
everything's interconnected to the history of your country.
I know there was somebody here from California College of the Arts that was saying that they were excited to watch your progress, your evolution.
Yeah, that's Effie. Hi,
Okay.
Effie.
Classmates, so.
Sorry, I didn't ask your question, sorry, or your comment, but now I have. Yeah. Kathy, did you want to stop recording or?
Oh, sure. Let me stop recording. And then Amy, we are,
Yeah,
here we go. There it is.
yeah. Well, yeah.